Welcome to another program in our series on Free Thinking Forum. I'm Bill Weir, and I'm privileged to again have with me Reverend David Breeden, the Senior Minister of First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. David, you were our first host on this program, and I'm glad that you could return now as guest and give us some of your, even more of your wisdom.
Oh, thank you.
We have talked an hour already, but there's so much more to talk about. One question that comes up occasionally is, are science and religion irreconcilable?
Well, I don't think that they are. I think that they are in two different worlds, and never the twain shall meet in some ways. Religion is a very old human idea. The scriptures in religions are very old, and they're art and poetry and metaphorical and beautiful in that realm, but they're not scientific. If what by that we mean, did it really rain only 40 days or that kind of thing? It's a different mindset in the ancient world, and it's still a different way of being in the world, thinking scientifically or thinking religiously. Now, a lot of humanists, many humanists, reject the religion entirely and want a completely scientific and logical and materialist worldview. But
you don't have values out of science.
Well, well, yes and no. I mean, that's why one of the interesting things about
compassion,
I think, about science,
love, those are not scientific, are they?
Well, yes, they are. One of the things that was interesting in the days when humanism was first being thought about in the early 20th century, they were reading Charles Darwin, and they were trying to figure out what the implications of evolution, of natural selection, were for the human animal. And they really began to think of humanity as another animal on the planet. And what does that mean? And where do values, where do morals come from then? They didn't know at the time what all of that actually meant. And nowadays we're a little closer, we think. Sociobiology looks at how humanity has evolved within tribal structures to develop these things that we call morals and ethics. So it's probably not the case that religions themselves created morality. They're
the attempt to explain morality, are they not?
They try to do the why out of morality.
And why we should
be
moral.
Exactly. But Islam didn't invent the idea of not killing your neighbor. Judaism did not create the idea of not killing your neighbor. The Ten Commandments were not the first time those 10 ideas had come up. They are very old in human history. So science does help us discover where probably those ideas come from, because there are some human moralities that are cross-cultural. Not killing the people you know, for example, is fortunately part of the human mind, completely devoid of any religious thinking.
That's an interesting view. I'm not sure I agree with you yet.
Well, I mean, very, very often humanists and atheist agnostics, we hear, well, you can't be moral if you aren't a Christian. You can't be moral if you're not religious. You can't be moral if you don't believe in God. The hole in that argument is that it's demonstrably not the case. We can see people who have absolutely no religious background or training whatsoever who act exactly like the people who do. Now, how can that be? Well, one of the things
they don't need theology to do it.
Well, no, you don't need theology to do it, and probably you don't learn morality in church. It's already preconceived as part of our wiring, if you will, from evolution as tribal beings. Because we survived for so long, 200,000 years roughly, in small tribal groups, and evolved the idea of cooperation and the idea of what is taboo, what is not forbidden, and these kinds of ideas over that time. And that's probably the reason why morality is basically a pan-human thing. Almost everybody agrees on some basic things.
Well, now take international trade.
Okay.
That can only function within additional agreed upon standards.
Yes.
Beyond what are native, born in the genes.
Right, right. Well, and there are arguments out there that the expansion of the monotheistic idea, of one God idea, that now permeates Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, where does that come from? And one of the arguments is that it comes from trade, as a matter of fact, that trade invents the idea of God, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And because if you look back in the ancient world, where people were isolated in tribal units, there was great distrust across tribal lines. Mm-hmm. But people figured out fairly quickly that it sure is nice to be able to get something that my tribe can't produce, or that the region I live in doesn't produce.
So they extended the idea of do not kill beyond the tribe.
That is the argument. So the Silk Road is, that runs through several different human cultures, bringing silk from China over into Asia, out of Asia. The idea being that, yes, when people started...
Into India and Europe.
Absolutely. When people started shaking hands and trading one thing for another, jewelry for silk, etc., that actually this begins this idea of expanding that tribe. So in tribal culture, it's fine to kill the tribe next door because they're not like us. But if you want to trade with them, you better be nice to them. So you're going to develop an idea that the tribe next door may be just as human as you are and may be just as trustworthy as you are. And so that's the argument of why this idea of one God begins to gel in the human mind. It's a fairly recent idea.
Yeah. I sometimes speak about global human civilization and encompassing that morality that is necessary for humanity to continue to exist.
Well, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights comes out of that idea. Eleanor Roosevelt pushed it very hard, and it was passed by the United Nations after the Second World War. Everyone was horrified with what had happened in the Second World War. But it also had shown some of the stress lines and cracks in the old European the colonial system. Mm-hmm. And so how are we going to continue living in some kind of just world without the Europeans running the place all the time? And the idea was then that just because you're human, that inherent worth and dignity, just because you were born, you have certain inalienable rights, certain things that you should be able to do. One of those is crossing borders, and we're seeing that with the Syrian immigration crisis right now. It is a fundamental right, argues this declaration, that people have the right to escape war and to move to other countries.
And yet I've just been reading a new book by one of the University of Minnesota law professors called The Contentious History of the International Bill of Human Rights discussion, in which he is helping us understand how difficult it was to get to that Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the steps toward government, nations agreeing upon either, and they even had to divide the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into two parts in order to deal with that and trying to get the unanimous support of various countries.
Right. Well, and I mean, one of the rights is freedom of conscience, and a lot of countries still does want people to be a particular religion.
Well, certainly, I've seen that in Thailand, for example, where Buddhism, you cannot criticize Buddhism.
Right. Right. And
nor the king.
Well, and that's, you know, well, yes, and freedom of speech is one of the basic things the UN Declaration tries to guarantee. It is an idealistic document. It's not honored by many nations of the world, but it is a statement of basic statement of humanism, I would argue.
A basic statement of humanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you remove the idea of tribal gods, this god is better than this god prefers this country to that other country, or God prefers me because I'm rich and you're not. When you remove all of those kinds of buffers in the system, you get down to, well, we're all just evolved primates, and we all should have equal rights before the law.
Yeah.
Including these nation states that have made up their own borders. Humanity does not need to recognize those borders. The borders keep people out. It's a way of denigrating one population. So humanists argue that we need a one world.
Yes.
Yep.
And we've even had governments trying to keep people in the. I visited Hungary, Poland, and Czechoslovakia when they were behind the Iron Curtain. Mm-hmm. Do you see some of that remaining today?
Well, you know, we are certainly stuck within our borders, especially when we start building walls and fences and alienating our neighbors.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the wall being erected by the federal government for Mexico. Am I still welcome in Mexico if we have this border fence that?
Well, a lot less welcome than you would have been otherwise. And,
yes.
And that's one of the problems with borders, especially borders where you have relatively affluent people on one side and relatively poor people on the other side. Mexico is not a third world country. Mexico scores right in about the midpoint in terms of income and social well-being in the world. It's not a third world country, but the contrast between the extreme wealth of the United States and the mid-sized wealth of Mexico is so extreme that it just cries out and causes the problems that we see.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand you're quite a student of Buddhism, and I'm wondering whether you could discuss how Buddhism came to be so popular these days.
I started studying Buddhism when I was in my 20s. I went to the first Buddhist college in the United States, Naropa Institute at the time. Now it's Naropa University.
Ah, my daughter got a graduate degree there.
There you go. Yes, and holistic medicine, meditation, yeah. Poetry. I went as a poetry student. My big hero was Allen Ginsberg, who had converted, quote unquote, from Judaism to Buddhism. Was a practicing Buddhist, and at the school they required us to study meditation. I wasn't particularly interested in it at the time. I was more interested in writing poetry, but it was part of the thing, so I did it. And
you've many books of poetry published now.
Yep, absolutely. It became part of my poetry practice, as a matter of fact. You know, the early Buddhists, well, in the late 19th century, Buddhism began to come into the U.S. Just kind of as a mistaken identity kind of thing. It really didn't begin wholesale in the U.S. until after the Second World War, when U.S. servicemen were stationed in Japan and then came back home, and they had converted to Buddhism, or they started teaching it. So it began to spread from those roots. It wasn't entirely well understood in those days. Because it was Western people, Americans, bringing their understanding of Buddhism back to the U.S., tweaking things to make it more acceptable to Westerners.
Well, wasn't Naropa, though, established by true Buddhists?
Yes. Trungpa Rinpoche escaped and came to the U.S. One of the things that spread Buddhism, and as an unintended consequence, was Red China. When China became communist, the Buddhists were not looked on well, and many of them tried to escape.
Any religion.
Well, exactly.
And so many Buddhists came from China, not ready to submit to their communist objections to religion.
Exactly. And so they came to the U.S. and with true Buddhism as an understanding. Trungpa Rinpoche was one of those. He started a press that's still around called Shambhala Press. His particular style of Tibetan Buddhism was Shambhala, and that's what they practiced at Naropa Institute when I was there. And it's basically a Zen practice, even though Zen is Japanese, but it's a Zen practice of clearing the mind, suppressing thoughts and trying to watch them float, and noticing that you're thinking and noticing the way that your mind is operating and creating emotions and ideas. And so I've stuck with that practice for many, many years.
And can people learn more about Buddhism at First Unitarian Society?
Oh, sure. Last year we had a Buddhist meditation teacher for some time, and we'll probably do that again this year. We haven't found the perfect person yet, but we're looking. The good thing about Buddhist meditation is that it can be completely divorced from its religious framework. There are all kinds of Buddhisms because it spread all over Asia, emanating out of India in the beginning as a heresy within Hinduism. So there's all kinds of understandings of how to do it, and some of them completely secular. Buddha was a guy. He was a man.
Never seen as divine.
And in most Buddhist traditions, not seen as divine.
Oh, but
yeah.
some.
Well,
some
there are folk things. It's really just like Taoism, in which you have a philosophical Taoism that is basically deist and anti-theist. And then you have a folk Taoism that gives us sort of the herbal remedies and that kind of stuff, in which there are these entities, these things that live in the plants and that kind of thing. Yeah. So there's very different kinds. Tibetan Buddhism is interesting in that it was a melding of Buddhism coming out of India in the early days, melding with a folk tradition, and so it's its own strange kind of Buddhism.
So what do you see as the future of religion in the United States?
Well, I think, one of the reasons that Buddhism has caught on, and yoga, and Hindu kirtans, the singing, chanting, celebration things, I think, is that Christianity doesn't do well at psychology, basically. And when people start looking at Buddhism or Taoism, they see that these are really psychological practices. They are practices to calm you down, to make you feel better, to help you feel better. They're great in working with the 12 steps with addiction, because what Buddhism teaches you is that you don't have to react the way you did the last time this happened. You can step inside between the stimulus and the reaction, and you can say, no, I'm not going to go get that beer this time. I'm not going to get angry and hit somebody this time. And after you realize that there is a separation between stimulus and your reaction, and that it's all in your mind, then you can begin to act in more compassionate ways.
So instead of simply reacting, one can think and choose how best to react.
Absolutely. In its more secular form, Buddhism has come to be called mindfulness, and you'll see mindfulness meditation in a lot of places, and that's using the techniques of Buddhism to quiet the mind, but not using any of the religious overtones, which are pretty well foreign to Westerners anyway. We live in a very different culture, and these things get jumbled a bit when you try to stick with true Buddhism.
Now, one of the other big things, not only in the United States but around the world, is the internet having quite an impact on religion. How do you see it as changing as a result of the internet?
Well, I was born into a Pentecostal fundamentalist family, and before the internet, and so when I began to question that tradition, I had nowhere to turn. Essentially, I mean, where do you go? A bookstore, a library. You have to get out and find these things. Nowadays, it's just a few clicks away, and you can look up, what's wrong with blank religion? What are the hypocrisies of blank religion? You can read up on the true history of Mormonism or the true history of Scientology, and the list goes on. And when you are able to Google that, then and find something that may be a little closer to the truth than you're being told in your home life, then you can begin to make your own decisions. And
well, that's revolutionary.
Yes, I think it's revolutionary in that that kind of information now is fairly readily available for most people. Still, people have to struggle at times, but it's becoming more and more out there. And I think we've rounded a corner into a new way of understanding the world, maybe, in which truth is just a click away. It's electronic. The truth is out there, and you can find it.
Now, one of the facets of computerization that I've been concerned about is the artificial intelligence gaining so much in terms of its capacity to think what would be the best way to get to that goal, that we come to the point where artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, is smarter than us. And what does the rise of machine intelligence mean? How can we ensure that it's safe for people?
I don't think that artificial intelligence is nearly as dangerous as some of the chemicals we make, to be very honest with you.
You're right.
But yes, I mean, the interesting thing about humanity and technology, though, if you really look at it and go back, and you can go back to the threshing machines that began to get the farmers of England unemployed, for example. And there were riots, and they burned the machines and this kind of stuff.
Luddite, is that
the Luddites, et cetera, yeah. And then the sabotage came from, in France, from throwing the sabot, the shoe, into the machines to make, to break them.
Really?
So humanity has always had this real tension between technology and the way it's always been. The interesting thing is, when you stop to think about it, is that we don't have massive unemployment now. The predictions for the threshing machine in England was that everyone would be unemployed. But that didn't happen. There were other things that cropped up. So it may be, and I don't want to be too optimistic about that, but it may be that technology always creates in its wake another way for people to do something.
To earn their way.
Right, exactly. And in the early 20th century, many people were predicting that we would eventually have 4-hour work days, 4 days a week. 4 and 4. It was a cry of some unions.
Really?
Because
that seems far off now.
Well, yeah, but what they were thinking was, okay, given the productivity that we need to have the world we have, if we keep up that zero-sum productivity, people will soon only have to work 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. The problem with that thesis is that that's not the way technology works, and people work 24/7 now, and we produce all this stuff, and we just keep wanting more. So yes, it's interesting.
How do we keep from getting wrapped up in more and more and more and more? Is there something about Unitarian Universalist, a humanist approach that helps keep people from being so materialistic?
Well, if you treat your fellow human as a fellow human instead of as an object, it does shut down some parts of capitalism that are a little bit ugly. It's always been part of the tradition of Unitarian Universalism and humanism to live as humbly and as you can. To have a low footprint. Nowadays we have carbon footprints. To have a very small footprint on the face of the planet. And that goes all the way back, to ancient Chinese philosophy, certainly. Epicurus was the Greek philosopher who said, what is a happy life? And his answer was not having any wishes that you can't get, It is wanting what you actually have right now.
Well, and Buddha was, how did he put it? Not wanting anything.
Yep. Well, getting past desire is a way of doing. Now, then you think about, well, wait a minute, isn't the entire advertising world about creating artificial desire? And so, yes, probably so. And so there are some conundrums that go along with that way of thinking.
Well, not getting so caught up in desire that we treat other people as means to an end.
Exactly, and beginning to think about what our choices mean for the rest of the planet. Fair trade helps a lot with being, actually paying people fairly for their coffee production and clothing production and that kind of thing.
And I think the coffee here is fair trade, is it not?
Yep, absolutely, and shade grown, so we don't have to cut down those trees. Absolutely, and it's thinking through those things, and it's often contradictory what is and isn't green, or isn't good for the planet. But we try.
And I've heard talk about solar.
Yeah, we are working on going 100% solar here, and so very low carbon footprint. And I think we'll get there.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to the day.
All right, absolutely.
We've got just a couple of more minutes, and have you told us what is the value of the multi-faith work that I see many Unitarian Universalists engaging in?
Unitarian Universalists.
You're active, are you not, in the downtown?
Downtown clergy, which is a group of, we have rabbis and imams and Christians and a humanist. I think the value, Unitarian Universalists and humanists are very good at multi-faith work because we have taught ourselves to respect other religions. And we don't think one is better than another, that one is the right answer. So I think that we do a fairly good job of reaching out and being the glue that holds these kind of multi-faith groups together. The only way we're going to fix some of our problems is for religions, people within religions, to begin to understand each other and talk instead of shooting at each other.
You're so right. I really appreciate these conversations, David. I hope we can continue them another time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to another program in our series on Free Thinking Forum. May we continue to use our capacity for free thinking.